The marble floors gleamed under the cold lights of Citadel Trust's central branch in downtown Chicago. The air buzzed faintly with the hum of security cameras and hushed conversations. At the front counter, a tall black woman in a navy hoodie stood calmly, her ID and withdrawal slip resting on the sleek glass surface. "I'm sorry," said branch manager Denise Whitlow, her voice laced with a polished smugness as she pushed the slip back, "but we can't just hand out $85,000 in cash to anyone who walks in off the street." Gasps and muffled laughs fluttered among the nearby tellers. One leaned toward her colleague and whispered just loud enough for it to echo, "She doesn't look like she even has $100." A ripple of chuckles followed, sharp, demeaning. The woman, Camille Jordan, stood her ground, her spine straight, her face expressionless, but not empty. Inside, a storm brewed. She had endured microaggressions her whole life, but this moment, so public, so blatant, was something else. Eyes from across the lobby watched her, some curious, some amused, others judgmental. "I've provided valid ID. I'm simply accessing my account," Camille said, her voice cool, steady. Another staff member, a man in a crisp shirt and an overinflated sense of authority, joined in. "We've had some questionable transactions from accounts like yours. It's just a precaution," he said with a smirk, his gaze scanning her modest clothing with thinly veiled contempt. This wasn't about money, it was about perception, about who looks like they belong. What the staff didn't know? Camille Jordan wasn't just a customer. She was someone with power far beyond their wildest assumptions, and they were about to find out the hard way. Have you ever been judged before they even knew your name? If you believe respect shouldn't depend on appearance, drop a hey. Respect first in the comments, and subscribe for more true stories that hit hard and inspired change. Long before she stood at the front counter of Citadel Trust's flagship branch, facing cold stares and condescending smirks, Camille Jordan had been on the other side of the glass. 26 years ago, she walked through the same doors as a freshly hired teller trainee, wearing a secondhand blazer, clutching a borrowed briefcase, and carrying a heart full of ambition. Her name tag then read simply, Camille, trainee. She remembered how the branch manager had barely looked her in the eye, how customers often ignored her or mistook her for a janitor, and how she worked twice as hard to earn half the recognition. Camille didn't come from privilege, no family trust fund, no elite connections. She was raised in a 2-bedroom apartment in Detroit by a single mother who worked night shifts at a nursing home and still found time to read her daughter Maya Angelou and teach her to never let anyone shrink her dreams. She rose quietly, methodically, earning every stripe not through favoritism, but through grit, intelligence, and relentless dedication. From teller to account specialist, then on to loan officer, she excelled at roles others had deemed too ambitious for someone like her. But Camille didn't stop. She studied at night, often balancing spreadsheets by day and textbooks by moonlight. She earned her MBA from Northwestern while running a high-volume suburban branch and caring for her aging mother. When other managers faltered, Camille's branches thrived. When other leaders pointed fingers, Camille solved problems. Her name became synonymous with turnaround success. She could breathe life into failing offices, earn back lost clients, and inspire even the most jaded employees. By her 15th year at Citadel, she was promoted to regional director, overseeing a dozen branches. In year 20, she became the chief strategy officer, leading innovations that modernized outdated systems and improved client retention across the board. But when the former CEO announced his early retirement last year, something shifted. Internally, Camille was the clear frontrunner. Her track record was spotless, her leadership admired, her vision sharp. Still, whispers began. Will the major clients feel confident with her as the face of the company? Is she media savvy enough? Does she project the traditional image of Citadel's legacy? Camille heard the whispers. She always had. But this time, the stakes were different. In private board meetings, she was grilled with questions thinly disguised as concerns. Some members asked about her leadership style. Others questioned whether she could command respect in the international space. The subtext was clear. It wasn't about capability, it was about comfort, about whether the old guard could stomach a black woman at the helm. Despite the resistance, she refused to lower herself to indignation. She presented facts, numbers, forecasts, and case studies. She laid out a strategy to make Citadel not just profitable, but ethical, inclusive, and future-ready. And then she won. After a tight boardroom vote, Camille Jordan was named CEO of Citadel Trust, making her the first Black woman to lead one of the top 15 financial institutions in the country. At her acceptance speech, she stood in front of rows of polished suits and flashing cameras and said clearly, "Every client, every community, every employee deserves respect, trust, and access. That's the Citadel we are going to build. No exceptions." The applause was polite, even warm. But behind the boardroom smiles, Camille knew the real test would come not in the speech, but in the systems. In her first months as CEO, Camille began quietly auditing internal reports. At a glance, customer satisfaction looked fine. But when she dug deeper, disaggregating the data by race, income, and zip code, an unsettling pattern emerged. Certain branches, especially the flagship downtown location, were losing customers of color at disproportionate rates. Formal complaints were minimal, but exit interviews revealed a different truth. Subtle biases, cold attitudes, and a feeling of being unwelcome. Camille didn't call a meeting. She didn't write a memo. She packed a simple purse, left her designer suits behind, and walked into the flagship branch one Tuesday morning dressed like a working-class citizen. Not to test her employees, but to witness her institution with unfiltered eyes. That day, she didn't come as a CEO. She came as a customer, and what she saw would change everything. At exactly 9:15 a.m., Camille Jordan walked through the revolving doors of Citadel Trust's downtown flagship branch, wearing a navy hoodie, black slacks, and a plain baseball cap. Her shoes were scuffed but clean, her purse was modest, and her makeup was minimal. It was a deliberate choice. Today, she wasn't the CEO of a billion-dollar institution. She was an average customer with a simple request. She took a seat in the waiting area, casually scrolling through her phone while her eyes discreetly observed the flow of service around her. It didn't take long for the truth to emerge. A white man in an expensive gray suit strolled in. Before he reached the counter, a smiling banker intercepted him. "Welcome back, Mr. Langston. Right this way." No waiting, no number, no ID check. He was escorted directly to a private desk. Next, an elderly Asian couple entered quietly. They were handed a plastic number tag with no eye contact and told to wait. No greeting, no warmth, just a hand motion toward the corner chairs. A young white woman in yoga pants stepped up to the quick service counter. The teller beamed, "Oh my gosh, I love your water bottle. Is that a Stanley?" They laughed about weekend plans, completed her transaction in under 2 minutes, and parted with a cheerful, "Have a great day." Then came a Hispanic man in a janitor uniform. He walked to the same counter. The teller's face changed immediately. No smile. "2 forms of ID, she demanded. He pulled out a work badge and driver's license. She eyed him suspiciously. "We'll need to verify these," she said, stepping away with both documents. The simple act of cashing a paycheck dragged on for nearly 10 minutes. Camille watched as this pattern repeated itself. 6 more customers entered. Every white patron was met with ease, smiles, even small talk. Customers of color were asked extra questions, made to wait longer, or dismissed with transactional coldness. By the time Camille stood up to approach the counter, she had already been waiting 37 minutes, even though 3 white clients who arrived after her had all been served. She stepped up calmly to the counter where a teller named Beth stood. Her smile faded the moment she saw Camille. "How can I help you?" Beth asked flatly, her tone cooler than the spring air outside. "I'd like to make a withdrawal," Camille said, sliding her state-issued ID and transaction slip across the glass. The amount was $85,000. Beth's eyebrows rose. She looked at the slip, then at Camille's face, then back to the ID. "This is a large amount," she said, her voice rising slightly. "It's well within the daily limit for my account type," Camille replied, keeping her tone calm, steady. Beth didn't respond. She leaned over and whispered something to the senior teller next to her, Marcus, who looked up, scanned Camille, then stepped over, standing behind Beth like a security detail. "Is there a problem here?" Marcus asked, not to Beth, but to Camille, in a volume that caught the attention of others in the lobby. Heads turned. A woman nearby clutched her purse. The energy in the room shifted. Suspicion floated in the air like perfume. "No problem at all," Camille answered, placing her Citadel Trust debit card beside her ID. "Just making a withdrawal." Marcus picked up her ID and examined it like it was counterfeit. "We've been seeing some unusual activity on these types of accounts lately," he said, lingering on the phrase, "these types." Camille didn't flinch. What types would that be, exactly? Beth typed into her terminal. Another employee, Jason, wandered over and leaned in to whisper something to Marcus. It wasn't subtle. "Maybe one of those laundering cases," he said, loud enough for Camille and others to hear. Jason looked Camille up and down, taking in her plain outfit, her natural hair, her simple purse. "Just need to verify the funds are actually yours," he said with fake sweetness. "You understand, right? It's for your safety." It was the oldest play in the discrimination handbook, mask the bias as protocol. Camille took a deep breath, holding her composure as she always had. "I understand the need for security, but I've provided proper ID, bank card, and documentation. I've been a customer here for years." That was when Marcus turned to wave over the branch manager, Denise Whitlow. She walked across the lobby with the practiced poise of someone who had never been questioned in her life. Her heels clicked confidently against the marble floor. She didn't introduce herself. She didn't ask Camille's name. She simply folded her arms and tilted her head. "I'm told you're trying to withdraw a large amount," she said, her tone syrupy but firm. "That's correct," Camille replied. "From my account." "Well," Denise said with a tight smile, $85,000 is significant. May I ask what it's for?" Camille's silence was deafening. Not a single white customer that morning had been asked to explain their financial decisions. Denise's eyes flicked to Camille's ID. "Camille Jordan," she read aloud. "This doesn't really seem like a transaction for someone like you." And there it was, the moment when every mask dropped. Not about fraud, not about policy, just plain institutionalized prejudice, voiced without shame in the center of a corporate lobby by someone in power. The air in the branch had shifted. It was no longer just cold. It was heavy, thick with judgment and silent tension. The buzz of the printers, the faint whir of the cash-counting machines, even the soft tap of keyboards, all faded into background noise as the confrontation unfolded in center stage. Camille Jordan stood calmly at the counter, flanked by teller Beth on one side and the increasingly agitated branch manager Denise Whitlow on the other. Behind them, staff members began to glance sideways, exchanging smirks and half-whispers like high school students before a fight breaks out. "This amount doesn't seem appropriate," Denise said, holding Camille's ID at arm's length, as if proximity might tarnish her French manicured nails. "We're very careful here about who we allow to withdraw this level of cash." Camille raised an eyebrow. "You mean your customers?" "I'm one of them." Denise didn't blink. "Citadel Trust serves a specific kind of clientele," she replied, her voice dropping low. "If you're seeking services better suited to your circumstances, I suggest trying one of the check-cashing outlets down the street. They're much more equipped for this type of transaction." The insult wasn't even veiled anymore. Camille glanced around. A young white mother had pulled her children closer, whispering in their ears. An elderly black man in a postal uniform shook his head in resignation. Two teenagers near the entrance had stopped pretending to browse brochures and were now watching openly. Even security cameras in the ceiling, quietly recording every second, bore silent witness to the injustice playing out. "I would like to speak to someone," Camille said, her voice unwavering, "who has the authority to complete this transaction, professionally, without condescension or assumptions." Denise's face flushed, not from embarrassment, but from the audacity of being challenged. "I am the authority in this branch," she snapped, leaning closer. Her breath reeked of coffee and entitlement. "There's no one else here you can talk to, so unless you leave, I'm going to call security." A murmur rippled through the lobby. Camille reached into her purse. Every eye followed her hand, some nervous, others suspicious. But all she pulled out was her phone. She stepped slightly aside, still in full view of everyone, and made a call. "Hello, it's Camille Jordan," she said calmly. "Yes, I'm at the downtown Citadel branch. They've refused the transaction and are now threatening to remove me." Across the counter, Marcus chuckled. Jason mimicked Camille's tone in a cartoonish falsetto. Beth fidgeted, clearly uncomfortable but silent. Denise crossed her arms. "You're calling your cousin or what?" she asked, half mocking, half curious. "Trying to get someone to vouch for you?" Camille didn't respond. Her eyes remained focused on the marble floor as she finished the call. "Diane, I need you here. Now." The name dropped like a weight. Diane Hayes, the chief operating officer of Citadel Trust, a woman feared and respected in equal measure, someone only a handful of people in the company had direct access to, someone who didn't just answer calls, she gave orders. A flicker of confusion passed across Denise's face. "Who?" she started, then caught herself. "Nice bluff." Camille looked up. "I don't bluff, not when dignity is on the line." Denise scoffed. "Security," she barked. A young security guard, barely out of training, stepped forward. His name badge read T. Morgan, and he looked as if he'd rather be anywhere else. "I need you to escort this woman out of the building," Denise said, waving toward Camille. "She's creating a disturbance and refuses to leave." Camille turned to the guard. "I'm a client of this bank. I have identification. I'm trying to access my own funds. I haven't raised my voice or broken a single policy." Thomas Morgan hesitated. His training manual had covered robberies and emergency exits, but not this. Not the gray area between injustice and orders. "Ma'am," he said softly. "Sir," Camille interrupted, calm but resolute, "what's happening here isn't just unprofessional. It's discriminatory, and it's being recorded on both my phone and your own security system." Denise rolled her eyes. "Oh, please. Don't play the victim card." But the damage was already done. Staff members shifted uncomfortably. Marcus's smirk disappeared. Even Jason, whose sarcasm had fueled the earlier mockery, now watched Denise with uncertain eyes. Camille raised her phone again. "Actually," she said, "according to Citadel's own customer policy, Section 5.1, customers are allowed to document interactions where they believe their rights are being violated." The confidence in her tone sent a chill through the room. Denise stepped back slightly, her posture slipping. "This is ridiculous," she muttered, more to herself than anyone. Then, with perfect timing, the lobby doors burst open. The sound of designer heels clicking across marble echoed like thunder. Diane Hayes stormed in, tablet in hand, jaw tight with fury. "Stop this, immediately." And in that instant, the entire atmosphere changed. For a moment, the entire branch froze. The sound of heels slicing across marble, the sudden hush that fell over the once mocking staff, and the presence of a woman who radiated authority. Diane Hayes, Chief Operating Officer of Citadel Trust, had turned the air electric. She didn't slow down. She didn't need to ask for attention. Every eye had already snapped to her. "Stop this immediately," she commanded, her voice slicing through the silence like a blade. Denise Whitlow took a half step back. Her confusion, still thick on her face, battled with a rising panic that she could no longer contain. "Miss Hayes, I wasn't expecting." Diane didn't even look at her. She walked directly to Camille, her entire demeanor shifting from steel to sincerity. The fierce glare she carried for the staff melted into something warmer, deeper. "Miss Jordan," she said, her voice laced with emotion, "I am so deeply sorry that this happened, especially here." The staff behind the counters looked from Camille to Diane in disbelief. Some mouths hung open. Others began to slowly connect the dots. Diane turned back to the branch staff, now pale with realization. "This," she announced, gesturing toward Camille with a reverence that made Denise visibly flinch, "is Camille Jordan, your CEO, the woman you just humiliated in front of your customers, your cameras, and your conscience." The lobby erupted in whispers. A customer dropped their pen. Jason's face turned ghostly white. Beth, the young teller, gasped audibly and took a step back, tears pooling at the corners of her eyes. Marcus staggered as if he'd been punched, but Denise, her face a mask of disbelief, shook her head. She can't be." "Don't," Diane cut in, her tone icy again. "You watched her walk in, you dismissed her, you profiled her, you mocked her, and now you think denial will save you?" Behind Diane, 3 members of the board of directors entered the branch, Jonathan Rains, Linda Kwan, and Elliot Price, faces set like stone. Their presence wasn't procedural. It was a statement. This had become a matter of institutional gravity. Diane raised her tablet. With a tap, security footage appeared on the screen. Camille walking through the front doors at 9:15 a.m., being ignored, judged, denied. Another tap, split-screen videos of white customers making large withdrawals being served with smiles, juxtaposed with Camille being interrogated, belittled. "Every second of this has been recorded," Diane said coldly. "Every facial expression, every comment, every double standard." Denise's mouth moved, but no words came out. Camille finally stepped forward, her calm voice returning to fill the space. "Do you know what I was thinking when I stood at that counter?" she asked, looking at each employee one by one. "Not about how offended I was, not even about how angry I should be. I was thinking about every single person who walks through these doors and doesn't get a second chance because they don't have the authority to call Diane Hayes, because they don't have the title to make people listen." She turned to Denise. "You thought I didn't belong here. You thought my presence was the problem." Camille looked toward the customers, many now watching with silent admiration and shame. "But the real problem was the system you thought would protect you from accountability." Denise's voice finally cracked through the weight. "You can't just—" "I can," Camille said, calm as thunder. "And I have." She turned to Thomas, the young security guard who had hesitated earlier. "Thomas," she said, "please escort former branch manager Denise Whitlow, Marcus, and Jason to gather their belongings and leave the premises. Effective immediately, their employment with Citadel Trust has been terminated." A stunned silence. Then the quiet scuffle of motion as Thomas nodded, this time with confidence, and began guiding the stunned trio toward the back hallway. No one clapped. No one cheered. It wasn't victory. It was accountability. Camille turned to Beth, the teller who had initiated the transaction but whose discomfort had been visible throughout. The young woman looked like she might collapse. Instead, Camille walked up to her and spoke quietly. "You knew it was wrong," she said gently. "That's where change begins." Beth blinked through her tears and nodded, whispering, "I'm so sorry." Diane stepped forward and placed a hand on Camille's shoulder. "We'll be conducting a full review," she announced. "Every policy, every protocol, this will never happen again. Not at this branch, not anywhere." As the board members took their positions beside Camille and Diane, forming a semicircle of support around her, the message was clear. Power had returned to its rightful place, not in fear, but in justice. The echo of departing footsteps from the disgraced employees faded into the stillness of the Citadel Trust lobby. No one moved. The usual rhythm of banking, phones ringing, signatures scribbled, coins counted, had vanished. In its place was a heavy, unshakable awareness. Something had just shifted permanently. Camille Jordan stood at the center of it all, calm, composed, and unshaken. No gloating, no revenge, just the presence of a leader who had come face to face with the rot in her own house and had chosen to address it head-on. She turned slowly, facing the stunned employees and waiting customers. "This isn't about embarrassment," she said. "It's about accountability." Her voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. It was the voice of someone who had seen the inside of the machine and knew how to fix it. "We cannot claim to be a trusted financial institution while tolerating behavior that erodes trust," Camille continued. "This morning wasn't just an isolated failure. It was the symptom of a culture left unchecked." She stepped closer to the teller counter, her gaze resting on Beth, the young woman whose discomfort had been written all over her face during the ordeal. "Beth," Camille said gently, "you followed procedure. You escalated a large transaction, but you also stood silent as your colleagues made assumptions. Ugly, dangerous assumptions." Beth nodded shakily, tears slipping down her cheeks. I didn't know how to stop them. I knew it was wrong, but I froze. I'm so sorry." Camille didn't rush her response. "It's hard to speak up when the people above you abuse their power, but the fact that you recognized it was wrong, that matters." She turned to Diane Hayes, who had been silently observing. Diane nodded. Then Camille said what no one expected. "Effective immediately, Beth will be placed on probation, not termination." A surprised murmur ran through the lobby, because recognition is the first step toward accountability, and accountability is the first step toward real change. "Beth, I believe you can be part of the solution if you're willing to learn, grow, and help lead." Beth sobbed openly now, nodding furiously. "I will. I promise. Thank you." Camille turned back to the room. "Let me be clear. What happened here today will not be swept under a rug. This is a turning point for this branch, for this company." She walked to the center of the lobby, where board members stood beside Diane, now holding iPads and notes from their real-time audit. Jonathan Rains, chairman of the board, stepped forward. "This isn't just about one incident," he said. "Our review already shows that what Camille experienced is part of a larger pattern. One we've ignored, no longer." Camille nodded. Starting today, we're launching an emergency internal review of every Citadel branch, not just for compliance, but for equity. Every department, every role. She took a deep breath. But that's not all. She turned to Beth once again. Beth, as someone who witnessed how things can go wrong and who still had the courage to feel something. The young teller looked up, her eyes wide with disbelief. I'm appointing you as interim branch manager. The entire room gasped. Beth's voice cracked. I'm not qualified. You're someone who saw a wrong and didn't join in, Camille interrupted. That's a start. You'll have training, support, mentorship. But most importantly, you'll bring perspective, the kind this branch desperately needs. Diane Hayes stepped in beside her. We've already begun implementing new protocols bank-wide. From here on out, performance reviews will be tied not just to sales or growth, but to how clients are treated, especially those who have been historically marginalized. Every customer matters, Camille added. Not just the wealthy, not just the polished, not just the familiar, but everyone. She turned back to the customers now standing in solemn silence. Many had been watching from the beginning. Some were recording. Others stood with arms crossed, not in defiance, but in solidarity. We are not just changing a policy, Camille said. We are changing a culture. In the following days, the story would make national headlines. But in that moment, what mattered most wasn't press releases or stock responses. It was truth spoken out loud. It was a wrong made right, not quietly, but in the exact space where it had happened. Camille stood for a moment longer in the place where she'd once been humiliated. Then she walked, shoulders tall, back straight, into the back office of the very branch she now owned, spiritually and legally. Justice hadn't whispered. It had spoken. 3 days after the incident at Citadel Trust's downtown branch, Camille Jordan stood before a wall of cameras, reporters, and flashing lights. The press conference was held in the East Wing of Citadel's national headquarters, a glass-paneled auditorium overlooking the skyline. But it wasn't the view that held the nation's attention. It was the woman at the podium. She wore a sharp navy suit, her expression composed but resolute. Gone was the hoodie and modest purse. But even now, Camille's eyes carried the same unwavering calm, the same steel that had helped her weather judgment and transform it into justice. Good afternoon, she began, her voice steady. 3 days ago, I walked into a branch of the company I lead and was treated as though I didn't belong, not because of what I said or what I did, but because of how I looked. I wasn't shocked. I was disappointed. And I knew that what I experienced was something others have endured quietly for years. The room fell still. So today, she continued, I'm here not to manage a public relations crisis, but to launch a public accountability revolution. She tapped the screen beside her. A new logo appeared, the Equitable Banking Initiative. This program represents a $50 million investment into making Citadel Trust not just profitable, but principled, Camille said. It will include 3 core pillars: anti-discrimination training, community engagement, and internal equity audits. Behind her sat a diverse panel of clients, some business owners, some community advocates, others just everyday customers, each of whom had once been turned away, dismissed, or denied service at Citadel. Now, they were seated beside Camille as founding members of the Client Equity Advisory Board. Meet Michael, Camille said, gesturing to a black entrepreneur seated to her left. He was denied 3 times for a business loan, despite having excellent credit and a solid plan. A few seats down, this is Elena, a single mother who was steered toward basic savings options despite qualifying for premium services. Then, and James, a recent college graduate who tried to open a business account and was asked to provide 6 forms of ID, not once, but twice. As the audience absorbed the weight of these stories, Camille paused. Banking discrimination isn't just unethical, it's economically damaging. It chokes entrepreneurship, it stifles growth, it pushes talent out of our economy. When we deny equal service, we deny potential. She outlined the next steps. All branch managers would now have their bonuses tied to customer equity scores measured by anonymized feedback across demographics. Customer interactions would be monitored not just for compliance, but for consistency and dignity. Every branch would display a sign, all customers deserve respect. If your experience does not reflect this value, please call this number. Below it, Camille's direct office line. The reporters stirred. One raised a hand. Miss Jordan, aren't you concerned about backlash, about the cost of publicly acknowledging discrimination? Camille smiled, but not gently. The greater cost is silence, she said. And the longer we hide injustice, the deeper it roots itself into our institutions. We are not hiding anymore. Diane Hayes, now seated in the front row, nodded silently. Beside her, board members who had initially hesitated about the reforms were now fully aligned, persuaded not just by the footage, but by the moral urgency Camille had brought to the table. Privately, Camille had warned them. If Citadel didn't change, the market would. Clients would walk, employees would leave, regulators would act. But with her leadership, they could lead the future of ethical banking instead of reacting to it too late. The press conference closed with Camille turning to the panel beside her. These individuals, she said, once faced closed doors at our bank, but now they will help us build better ones for everyone. In the weeks that followed, Citadel's transformation became a national case study. Other banks scrambled to update their diversity pledges. Civil rights organizations requested collaboration. Even lawmakers reached out to Camille, asking how her equity model could inform federal banking oversight. But for Camille, it was never about applause. 6 months later, she slipped back into casual clothes and visited 5 different branches across the country, unannounced. In every one, she posed as a first-time customer. And in every one, she was treated with warmth, efficiency, and equal respect. The revolution hadn't just been declared. It had taken root. The air was cool, the morning quiet. A gentle breeze rustled the leaves outside as Camille Jordan stepped through the glass doors of a small Citadel Trust branch in suburban Ohio. She wore a simple denim jacket, loose black slacks, and sneakers. No entourage, no cameras, no hint of the executive title that made headlines months earlier. It had been 6 months since the scandal that shook her bank and the country. Now she walked alone. She had visited 5 other branches already that week, all unannounced. No one recognized her, and that was exactly what she wanted. Camille wasn't looking for applause. She was listening for echoes of change, of growth, of whether the roots she had planted were truly taking hold. At the counter, a young teller named Marisol greeted her with a bright smile. "Good morning. How can I help you today?" Camille smiled back. "I'd like to open a new savings account," she said, handing over her ID. Marisol took it, verified it efficiently, and said, "I can walk you through your options. Would you prefer something with a high-yield return or more flexibility for withdrawals?" Camille blinked, surprised not by the options, but by the tone. It was friendly, professional. No assumptions, no second glances at her clothes or skin, just service, pure and simple. As Marisol explained account benefits, Camille looked around. A Latina mother with 2 children was speaking to a financial advisor at the corner desk. A black couple in business attire were finalizing a mortgage application. An older Asian man was being walked through mobile banking by a patient staff member. No one was rushed. No one was overlooked. This was the vision she had dared to believe in. She signed the account documents and thanked Marisol for her time. The teller, still unaware of who she'd just assisted, simply smiled and replied, "We're here if you need anything else. Have a great day." Camille stepped outside into the sun and took a long breath. The journey had been longer than most knew. In the weeks following the press conference, her reforms hadn't been easy. She faced boardroom pushback, media scrutiny, and staff anxiety. There were moments she wondered if the system truly wanted to change or if it simply wanted to survive the storm. But change, she discovered, doesn't always shout. Sometimes it builds quietly, one branch at a time, one brave employee at a time, one policy rewritten, one culture reborn. Behind the scenes, Camille had overseen the largest internal reform in Citadel Trust's 120-year history. Equity audits were now embedded into every quarterly review. Anonymous client feedback, disaggregated by race and income, was used to grade branch performance. Every new employee completed bias training, co-designed with civil rights organizations. Leadership pipelines were opened for underrepresented staff, with scholarships, mentorships, and fast-track development. Most importantly, a new sign had gone up at every Citadel branch window, framed in silver. All customers deserve dignity, equity, and respect. If your experience doesn't reflect these values, call this number. And beneath it, Camille Jordan's direct line. Some thought it was performative, a gesture, but she meant it. In her office, every Friday morning, she carved out 2 hours to listen to voicemails. Some were long and painful, others were hopeful. A few just wanted to say thank you. She responded to as many as she could, not because it was her job, but because it was her promise. And so while the world moved on, Camille quietly kept building. Her story made its way into leadership seminars, civil rights documentaries, and even university case studies, not as a scandal, but as a blueprint. One newspaper headline said, "From humiliation to hope, how Camille Jordan changed banking forever." But for Camille, legacy was never about headlines. It was about moments like this, standing outside a branch where no one stared, no one questioned, no one denied her the service they offered to others without thought. It was about trust being rebuilt, not with slogans, but with daily actions. She pulled out her phone, opened the Notes app, and typed one line. Change doesn't begin when you're recognized. It begins when you act, even if no one's watching. Then she smiled, tucked the phone away, and disappeared into the morning crowd. Her name was known, but that day she walked like any other woman, because in a truly equitable world, that's exactly who she was. If this story moved you, share it. Let others know that quiet dignity is power, that change is possible, that respect isn't a privilege, it's a right. Thank you for walking this journey with Camille Jordan.